Today, I'm joined by a recurring guest, maybe the most frequent guest on the show. We'll have to stat check that in the background, Ben. It's none other than Brandon Bedford, the competitive enablement manager at Klue, friend of the show, friend in general, and one of my favorite people to talk to. Brandon, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Today, we're chatting all things AI. Brandon has a lot of takes on this, both how AI is impacting how companies are competing with one another, and also how he's using AI as a compete professional himself and how he's seeing others use it. So we're going to tackle both of those things today. Like we always like to do with the podcast, we open with usually three quick tips, three quick questions, but I think they're going to go a little bit deeper today. So, first one, how has AI already had an impact on compete and competition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the kind of meta answer here is that AI is moving super, super fast. And so like what we kind of discussed on the pod, maybe in previous episodes, like there's enough time for people to kind of like take a step back and realize what's happening, analyze it, make sense of it. But with AI, like there's literally new things coming out every single week. There's a new plugin for ChatGPT. There's a new, I was just looking into a thing called Code Interpreter. I think it's been out for a little while. But then just this week, there's like a new version of the Code Interpreter. And so there's all these new applications coming out, and not only coming from like the big players like OpenAI, partnered with Microsoft, you have Google doing Bard, others as well. There's a ton of startups that are just kind of taking a swing into this AI space. And so I think it's a really cool moment for not just those AI companies, but any software company that can benefit from AI. And I'm sure we're going to get a little bit more into that. So sorry, to go back to your question, like what have we already seen in the space? Gosh, I think the way I kind of think back, so I'm looking back to now November 2022. That I think was when ChatGPT was officially announced. I know LLMs and all that stuff has been around for a while, but that was kind of the official announcement date. I think the first thing we saw that came out of that was, okay, let's just go to ChatGPT and start asking questions. And I think a lot of people are still doing that today. And I think there's still some value in that, but it's a pretty surface level application, right? Like, tell me about competitor X, tell me about competitor Y. Then I think the next wave we start to see in kind of Q1, Q2 of 2023 was summarization. I think a really powerful application of these LLMs like ChatGPT is the ability to take, large data, but basically, I want to say text, but also other types of data, and summarize that into something really, short and impactful. At Klue, we released our AI alerts summarization. So any article that comes into Klue can be summarized instantly by using these LLMs. So we start to see that kind of roll out into the space, which I think was like the first logical step when it comes to applying this technology. And I think we're now in this next phase where people, like the obvious low-hanging fruit, have been tackled. Yep. Now, I think we're starting to see some more unique and creative endeavors when it comes to applying AI in our space. And I know we have a lot of exciting things in the works. I don't want to talk about all of them, but maybe I'll share one example that we have been talking about for the past 2 quarters in our product webinar to our customers is online reviews. So competitors have tons of online reviews online, oftentimes hundreds, if not thousands of reviews on sites like TrustRadius or G2 or Capterra. But as a competitive enablement practitioner, I don't have time to go through and read every single one. And so leveraging a technology like these LLMs and AI, this technology can read through all of them for me, essentially, categorize them, tag them, find the different themes within them, and present that to me in a summary or a set of summaries. And I think this is where we're starting to get into that realm of like really cool applications around how AI can help people like myself understand our competitors and ultimately differentiate and beat them. So yeah, I guess an analogy to use here is I think everyone says over in the early innings, and I think yes, over like the broad humanity time scale we are, but I think we are like starting to go into the second inning at least. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like we've captured some of that like immediately obvious value, and now we're starting to get to some cool, more advanced applications.
So you kind of shared there one of the applications that like works or helps folks in your role. Are there any other applications you're seeing, just broadly speaking, with that you like AI releases from companies that are starting to go beyond sort of just like the summarization?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'll just share some of the recent examples I've seen. I mean, there's tons, but the ones that really resonated with me, I think one is around, we're seeing a lot, especially in marketing, around different types of content. So I think one thing that people are finding is not only is AI good at taking lots of data and summarizing it down, but it's also really good at synthesizing or creating data. It might not pass as like a publishable blog post, but it's great at pumping out first drafts. And for anyone that's done any creative writing, they know that like that's one of the hardest things, just sit down and start writing. And so to be able to plug in a prompt or a series of prompts into something like ChatGPT or Bard, get a first draft. And yeah, it's a little robotic. Yeah, it's maybe not in like natural language, if you will, no pun intended. It's something to work with, and then you can add your own style, you can tweak it. So I think that's a really cool application, and that applies, of course, to content, to script writing, to various creative endeavors. There's a lot that's going on in kind of graphic design and like the visual arts, if you will, around Mid-Journey, image generation, video generation, those kinds of things. And then the other one that I'll say is I think there's interesting applications like within certain kind of industries. So the one that's sticking to my mind recently is Gong. So Gong, I believe they're calling it Gong Engage now, which is their kind of foray into the sales engagement space, which I'm sure we'll touch on some more. But they have some AI functionality where you can ask questions about a particular call and get answers. And so again, I know there's a lot of different applications for Gong, but as a compete practitioner, like it is time consuming to have to go into Gong and find specific calls where competitors were brought up, or have to ask our sales team to flag certain calls that are interesting. Gong is leveraging AI in a really interesting way to make navigating their platform easier. And so that's one that I think is particularly useful. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, where it's less AI for AI's sake. It's AI being injected into an existing platform that just makes the tool easier to use and more valuable.
That's another great use case for Compete Pros. Actually, I was using Gong Engage the other day myself, just reviewing notes back on different calls I'd had, coming up with ideas for our upcoming event. It was, the time savings was madness. I didn't have to go back to my incoherent manual notes that I scribbled down. If anyone's seen my notebook, it's a disaster. On that Gong Engage piece then, I'm curious, not just like sort of the use cases and the benefits for an end user. There is an interesting thing we're seeing as well with the proliferation of AI in terms of how it's changing categories or blurring the lines of categories and how companies are competing with each other. You shared an awesome Intel digest with the Klue team, actually using kind of Gong as that use case. So could you share a little bit about that and sort of how competition at a broader scale is changing or accelerating with all of this AI proliferation increase? You know what I mean.
Yeah, no, totally. That was a perfect setup. That's why they pay you the big bucks, Adam. No, I think this is a perfect example that I'll share here around Gong and how AI is shifting landscapes, broadly speaking. And I think it's partly AI, but it's partly just the reality of the global markets right now. And I'll touch on that. So first, I'll share the specific example. So for people that are following, sales technology or B2B SaaS in general, they might have heard this story where there is a kind of classic duel between SalesLoft and Outreach in the sales engagement space, which is, I don't have to keep you honest here, but basically platforms that help sales professionals engage with their prospects and their buyers. So communication tools. And sales off and outreach have been kind of fighting in that space for a long time. They've been really vying for that leadership position. And then all of a sudden, basically within the span of weeks, if not 1 week, we had two very interesting market events happen. First was Gong. So they released Gong Engage. And through a series of LinkedIn posts, press release, and I think blog posts, they basically shared how they are firmly going to enter that market. I loved one of the taglines. I want to say it was Udi that shared this. Their chief evangelism officer, I think is his official title. He shared that they have a late mover advantage, right? And for anyone that, went to business school or, it's a pretty common concept where you hear of the first mover advantage into a space, right? You're first, you are the first person tackling the problem, you have a head start, but they reposition that as their late mover advantage in that they got to kind of stand back, see what the other players were doing, largely sales off and outreach, and now are making a strategic bet on the space with a differentiated approach. And their approach, lo and behold, was to be very AI forward. They're enabling, a lot of this functionality through AI, through the data set that they have with their Gong calls, et cetera. So I thought that was really cool. And then what happened, I think, again, maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, Klue announced that they had acquired Groove. And Groove is another play in that space. You would say arguably third in that race, in sales engagement, third compared to sales off and outreach. And so Klue acquiring Groove, again, another very firm and direct way of saying, hey, we're entering this battle as well. And so now you have, what before was kind of just your, typical vying for market leadership, which happens in a lot of spaces, right? You have kind of two leaders fighting for that number one spot. Now you have, that's still going on, right? Sales off and outreach, of course, are still duking it out, but now you have Gong entering that space, and now you have Klue entering that space. And I think a couple takeaways here is, one, as mentioned, like AI is kind of the catalyst. I mean, certainly in Gong's case, that was like a huge part of their move into the space. But you could argue as well from Klue's perspective, like they are putting a lot of, AI functionality out there around, I think, what they're calling Copilot, and that's enabling all these new use cases for their platform. And so anyways, to kind of distill this away from this example, I think AI is doing a couple of things. One, it's introducing new use cases for existing tools, right? And so whether it's Gong or Klue or Klue for that matter, AI is going to unlock a whole bunch of new use cases and scenarios and value ultimately for that software's customers. And while that value might be within, their core competency, their original market, there's a good chance that that use case or that value is actually in an adjacent market. And that's going to encourage them to move into that space. And all of a sudden, they're now competing against companies that they weren't competing against before. And so, if you were to ask anyone that's like familiar with this space, 3 years ago, even like 1 year ago, arguably, hey, would you imagine Gong, Klue, and sales off and outreach would all be competing? They probably wouldn't have had that on their 2023 bingo card.
Yeah, I know. It's nuts to kind of see that happen so quickly, like so quickly. And also, not only on this side, I think when you say like new use cases for existing tool sets, and so that kind of blurs the line of traditional categories as kind of you've got your yard over here, the neighbor has their yard over here, and it's only the fence kind of got knocked down. It's like, maybe I'll just creep on over here. Maybe I'll take a little bit here. Maybe I'll let my dog pee on this little bit of the yard. I don't know where that came from, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Right.
Also, on the other side, I think as well, and even probably we've seen it, and you've seen it as the person running Compete at Klue, is the ability to stand up, like ankle biters being able to stand up in probably a fraction of the time with maybe like a small subset of the use case that Klue or another platform can deliver. Like we've seen a lot more sort of like ankle biters or little like things that could do maybe percent of what Klue does, but they're positioning as such, or like trying to make their way into that category. And it's been really interesting seeing that as someone loves checking out our compete channel, all that folks are sharing this in. Like, hey, have you heard about this piece? Like, Brandon, you're sharing it in yourself, that like there's the blurring of the lines amongst the big players and trying to kind of dominate or monopolize multiple categories, but then also the bottoms up approach of a lot more quick startups, quick, easy lifts, I think.
Totally. Yeah. It's a great point. Like, and just to share, yeah, this was maybe a month or a month and a half ago, we started to notice a whole bunch of startups entering our space, be it competitive enablement, competitive intelligence. And a lot of them, no surprise there, were focused on that AI first angle, applying AI to competitive intelligence, market intelligence, whatever it might be, the various kind of, like you said, niche use cases. And overall, I think that's a great thing, right? I think that's actually one of the more positive sides of the markets right now, right? Like, I think everyone is experiencing, especially in, B2B software, markets are tighter. It's tougher to sell deals. CFOs are being very strict with budget all across the board. And so that's made markets more competitive. But at the same time, with this kind of new technology, this new AI platform, if you will, that's encouraging new startups to enter spaces. And I think that's kind of like the cleansing fires of markets, if you will, right? Like, if you just have the same two incumbents, just duking it out over and over, that actually doesn't lead to necessarily more value for the end user and the customer. By having, and you see that obviously the classic example of this is oligopolies, or the extreme example is a monopoly, right? As Canadians, we have an oligopoly in the telecom industry, for example, and I have to be careful when I sit here, but that does, there's an argument to be made that leads to less consumer value versus having a lot of thriving competition and lots of startups that are disrupting things. And so I guess I'm saying all that to say, like, we welcome the competition from startups. I think, obviously we want to win in our market, but if a new startup enters our space and has some new and innovative approach, or can solve a problem that, us as a bigger company aren't able to dedicate resources to, that's great. That's great for the market. That's great for our buyers. And it adds more clarity, I think, to the market. And so, yeah, I think that's another element, is you're seeing all these startups kind of, there's a new wave of startups, I should say, entering.
I want your take on something else, and this is something that's come up a lot from actually talking with our CEO, Jason, the importance of data now in this kind of new AI world. And I think data, and this isn't a new phenomenon, the importance and the value of data is like the new gold. But how do you see data being the big competitive advantage or the big unlock when AI is breaking down fences and people are kind of trying to steal as much market share across as many categories or enter into new categories?
I absolutely love this question, Adam, because so if we go back to your lawn analogy with neighbors, let's replace the lawns with ponds. And shout out to Adam Webb on our product management team for this one. So we were having a deep conversation about this over a beer around how AI could impact not just our space, but every space. I think this is really an interesting analogy where you have these pools, right? If you imagine like the Salesforce outreach pool, and then you have the Gong pool, and the barriers between those pools have started to emerge, and it's becoming one bigger pool. Meanwhile, you have this like torrential stream, and that is like LLMs, AI, open AI, right? And every pool is at some level of risk to just being swept into that. And I'm trying to think of a really like obvious example, and I'm not thinking of one, but there are a lot of software. Maybe it's best I don't have a specific example and I make an enemy here, but there are, I think, a lot of basic applications of software that are just completely, like, their value has gone to zero because you can now just do that with ChatGPT. And that's an example of a pool that's just been swept into this stream. And so I think while there is this battle between the pools to kind of capture that, there's simultaneously this like existential threat to a lot of categories that like, could AI just completely reinvent or wipe out our category? I've drank the Klue Kool-Aid, but like I genuinely believe this, that like in terms of competitive enablement, like, and we've been saying this for years, well, long before LLMs ever became a thing, that competitive enablement at best will be a co-pilot situation with AI. And AI, you cannot throw your compete program on autopilot. And for any companies that are out there, putting their compete program on autopilot, getting rid of their competitive enablement team or cutting their product marketing team in half, I would say be very careful, because one of your competitors who is not doing that has a team dedicated to their competitive enablement program. Maybe he's using Klue. They're going to start winning more competitive deals, and those pools are very tight right now. And so, anyways, that was a bit of a rant there on that. But to bring this back to AI, I think there's this like tension between like adjacent spaces, but then also like this existential threat, which is AI as a whole. And so, why do I think that's important? This all goes back to your question, which is data. I think that this reframe has changed what a lot of companies are thinking about. One of them we just talked about. A lot of companies are looking at their neighbors, looking at adjacent markets, like how do we capture more use cases? But I think the other kind of metagame that's changed is this focus on data. Because I know I'm kind of speaking around it a bit. Let me try to be as direct as possible. AI is making external data, like publicly available data, very cheap and much easier to use. And so I can now go to ChatGPT or Bard and just ask a question and get answers based off of the public web. And so now there's this rush from companies to be like, okay, well, if we rely on public data, our business model could be at jeopardy. Those are the companies that are at risk of getting swept into the stream. What is our proprietary data? What is our premium data? What is our data that only we can provide, or data that we have either a unique data set or a unique kind of manipulation of that data? And like, that's the conversation I think that's happening in a lot of companies. My guess right now is like, what is our proprietary data? What is our premium data that we offer, right? And then again, I'll just, share transparently for the viewers, like for Klue, that is like, of course, there's a part of competitive intelligence which is pulling from the web, but there's a huge part of competitive intelligence which is pulling from internal sources, pulling from call recordings, pulling from win-loss interviews, win-loss surveys, from CRM. And all of those data sources get combined through Klue that provides something that's proprietary and a bit more defensible than just public data. And so I think there's going to be like varying degrees of this, right? I think that, and again, I don't know what the ultimate answer is, but I do think that a lot more companies are now thinking about their business in terms of data, where perhaps they hadn't been thinking about that as much in the past.
Data's the ultimate competitive moat you have right now. I think when you mentioned LLMs have kind of run roughshod over maybe nice to have applications. And with market conditions as they are, it's like a perfect recipe for kind of wiping out things that aren't business critical, which is just, it's unfortunate to say, but that's what has happened. It's actually funny as well when you mention that, so the evolution or the first innings, second innings of AI, that you're kind of talking to that data piece too, is like, first innings was, okay, can we use the LLM on top of our existing tech stack to summarize? And now we're getting to that segment. It's like, what is that really cool, unique use case or insights we can build? And it's most likely going to be in that proprietary data set so that we can keep our lot and stop competitors coming in and start to take more and more market share or squares of our yard. It's
totally
endlessly go on.
I was just gonna say, maybe like to use a real example here is, at the very outset of our conversation, I mentioned ChatGPT and how one of the first things people did was start asking questions about their competitors. And I think anyone that's listening or watching this podcast, they know that there is value in that, but there was limitations to that. And I think that's like a perfect microcosm of kind of what I'm describing here is what was able to be done with ChatGPT. Any business that fully relies on that and was delivering that is likely going to be going away pretty soon, or is going to have a very tough time in the years ahead. But that part, when you read that ChatGPT reply and you were like, that didn't quite get it. It didn't fully understand the nuance of a sales conversation, or didn't fully understand our differentiators, but I'll take that and I'll manipulate it. Like, that's the element that I think is basically a proxy for that premium data source. What's that proprietary piece that ChatGPT couldn't just solve on its own? And again, keep in mind, that's ChatGPT V1, right? ChatGPT is going to get better, and it's been getting better at an exponential pace. But I do think that there are certain applications where there will always be a layer where, and I have to be careful saying always at a time like this, but there will always be a layer where you need some sort of human verification, human curation. And ChatGPT is going to get real damn good, but there's going to be a distinction, I think, between the companies that survive and the companies that don't, and it will be how much can just be replicated by ChatGPT out of a prompt, basically.
I like that I opened it saying we do 3 rapid fire questions and then we just riffed for 20 minutes, which is my favorite kind of conversation. This is what often happens in some of our meetings, friends. But to wrap this up, actually, to tie this back a little bit more to folks that are running Compete now, product marketers, people in Compete, could you share maybe a couple examples, some quick hit ways that you're using or that you've seen others using AI in their role today to be either more efficient, more powerful, just unlock more in your role?
Totally, yeah. I think I'll share it, and I'm going to root this kind of in like the market conditions as well, because I think that's a piece that we kind of brought up a couple times that I haven't, mentioned as explicitly. Like, with AI, whether your company is explicitly thinking this or not, like, there is a drive right now to do more with less. Everyone's heard those words and is probably a little bit triggered by them. But that is the reality right now in a lot of markets, right? Interest rates went up, which means growth is more expensive, which means, budgets are tighter. And so what does that mean from a practitioner standpoint? If you're running a Compete program or thinking about starting your Compete program, is prioritization is going to be critical. Like, you do not have time to do all the things on your wish list. So you have to make sure that your wish list is ordered in the right order of operations. And so, we recently released competitive revenue analytics. It's a service we've provided for a long time, but it's now fully in the product where you can plug in your CRM data and see these are your top threats to revenue from a competitor standpoint. And then you can even look at this quarter and see, hey, here are the competitors that are in deals that are open right now that could be closing this quarter. So basically, here are deals that you could impact and therefore impact revenue this quarter. It's that level of prioritization, I think, is needed now more than ever. Again, product marketers, I hear you, like we've been strapped forever, but we're even more strapped now. And so being able to not just prioritize, but then also defend your prioritization to, another stakeholder to say, hey, here's why we're prioritizing these competitors, I think is important. But on the flip side, and again, not to contradict what I just said, there is so much more activity in markets. I think it's important to be able to track your entire competitive landscape. So again, in Klue, you can toss in as many competitors as you want and track them. We don't want to limit you specifically for times like this, where literally just before hopping on, Adam, I added 2 more companies into our Klue space to track them. And so this is the reality of times like this, is whether it's another pool that's encroaching on your pool, like a Gong or a Clary, or if you just want to track OpenAI and like the various applications that are happening in your space, like you need to have your finger on the pulse in case something does happen. So to kind of mend those 2 things together, I would say prioritize ruthlessly, but at the same time, make sure you're monitoring your surroundings. Be a little bit extra vigilant at a time like this, because you never know when a new competitor is entering, or a next door neighbor or a partner of yours maybe starts entering your space, and all of a sudden you have a new threat on your hands. So I'd say it's kind of a combination of those two things.
Brandon, this was awesome. Always appreciate you joining us. I feel like you haven't been on in a minute. We'll have to do this a bit more frequently.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I'm down.
Folks, follow Brandon on LinkedIn. All things compete and other things too. A great follow. One of my favorites, and we'll catch everyone next week. I'm buzzing right now, Brandon. I think we got to do another AI part 2 here, to be honest.
I'm game. Maybe we can get some questions from the audience. I threw up a poll on LinkedIn, didn't get any bites, but I'm sure we'll get some for the next time.
Let's do it. If you got any AI questions, shoot them to me or Brando, and we'll make sure that we answer them soon. We'll catch everyone next week.